إن أعجبك الفيديو لا تنسى الإعجاب والاشتراك في القناة.
Welcome to Lesson 3. Right now you have a web page that has structure, but that doesn't look good at all. That's okay. In this lesson you're going to learn how to use CSS code to add style to your Welcome to Lesson 3. Right now you have a web page that has structure, but that doesn't look good at all. That's okay. In this lesson you're going to learn how to use CSS code to add style to your page. Now, as you learn to write CSS code, you'll really be introduced to one of the most important ideas in computer programming. Don't repeat yourself. Avoiding repetition is essential in all areas of programming, and this is where you're going to be first exposed to that. So, as you watch, pay attention to how CSS allows programmers to avoid repetition and how that avoiding of repetition can really help you make good code.
Okay, so opening our file in the browser is probably not what you expected. Looking at it in developer tools, the structure is exactly as you defined it, but the style description isn't there, and the browser uses its default style for all of the elements. And as you can see, it's not very pretty. And the visual layout is completely off as well. Let's go ahead and add in some styles. Do you remember earlier when I talked about the HTML file telling the browser where to find the style information? Yeah, we need to add that. First, you need to add a single line at the start of the HTML file. This tells the browser that the type of document is an HTML document. Then you need to add the top level tag HTML because everything here is HTML. And don't forget, every time we have the start tag, we also need to have the end tag. And then, so our code is easier to read, we'll indent our HTML structure so that it's located in between our two HTML tags. After the HTML tag, we need to add a head tag. This is where you'll add the link to the style file. To add a link to the style file, we start typing link and then hit tab. Here, Sublime Text has automatically filled in all of the information we need, except for the name of the file that contains our style information, which in this case is called style.css. After the closure of the head tag, we then add the body tag. Now, contained within our body tags will be our HTML structure that we wrote before. So we need to move this code in between our body tags. Again, for code readability, we've indented the HTML structure. So that we have a bit more to look and work with, let's replace the placeholder description with some text. You can choose to write your own text or simply use what we've provided in the instructor notes. Once the text is added, save the file and then refresh your browser page. You can see that it updated with the text that we've included. And since you've linked your style sheet to your HTML file, you can go to the style.css file and add some style to the page. And just for fun, how about we add the following style? Save the file and refresh your browser. Then, tell me what happened. Did the box with class description turn red? Did all text turn red? Or did the text in the description box turn red? Or did nothing happen? Great! Now that you have the structure of the page down, you can work on making it look like the design you were provided. Now, to do this, you need to use CSS, or Cascading Style Sheets. Now, you can probably assume that style means looks, or the way that the website will appear to the user. But what do cascading and sheets mean? First, you can have several CSS files or sheets that will be referenced in HTML, and all of them will be used to find out the final and visible style for your page. Think of it in terms of laws. You have a national law that deals with how your country is organized, and then you might have state laws which tell you what you can or cannot do in a given state. And then you might have municipality laws which specify what you can or cannot do in your city. And then at the end you might have your own house rules. Well, CSS is a bit different because with CSS the most specific rule is applied to every element. So your house rules would actually be the same as the national laws. Wouldn't this be awesome if this was true in real life? For example, I went to school in Orlando, and I made it a rule that we did theme park Mondays, meaning if I had time on Monday, I went to the theme park. It was a house rule. Wouldn't that be great if it was national law? I could go to a theme park every Monday. Now, this concept of most specific rule applied is what the word cascading means. You keep going down and down into the rules until you find the one that best describes the elements, and then that rule gets applied. In CSS, you first write what's called a selector, and this defines what elements of the page a particular style will apply to. You can select an HTML tag, and that rule will apply to all tags on the page. And if, for example, you want to apply style to all paragraphs on a page, you can do so by writing the following. Another way to do so is to select elements by class. And this is what we did in our previous example. So if we want to write a style that applies to the class description, we do so by typing .description, and inside the brackets, you write the style in the form attribute:value. So for example, we can say attribute color is value red. You can also combine selectors. So for example, you can select all links that are inside an element with the class article. There are links to the instructor notes for more information on this. Now, earlier we said that red wasn't really the best color, but what if we wanted to learn more about colors and how to define them? Logically, we could say instead of typing red, I might want to type blue or black or any other color. But what if I want to get more specific? There's got to be a way to do that, right? Of course there is. I mean, CSS has a lot of functionality, and it's impossible and unnecessary to go into every detail right now and memorize all possible attributes and values. I mean, you probably fall asleep at your computer right now, and none of us want that. Instead, you should get comfortable referencing the CSS documentation. We've included a link in the instructor notes. In exploring the page, you'll see that there are a lot of attributes that you can use. For example, going back to our color reference, we can search for color. Scrolling through the documentation, you'll find examples of different ways you can define colors. You can find the color red we used before. You could also call RGB colors. Here you'll find the color red example we used earlier. You could also call hexadecimal colors or even RGB. Going back to the documentation, let's do a small exploration into font properties. Search on the page for the font style attribute. Then answer the following question. Which of the following are possible values for the font style property? Is italic a possible value? What about bold? Or normal? Is that a possible value? What about standard? Also, which property would you use to make the text look bold? Changing the visual properties of an element only changes how the element is displayed, not what kind of element it is. You should be sure to choose the right type of element for certain parts of a page, depending on what the purpose of that element is. For example, in this page, the title at the top of the page is really text, giving the user an understanding of what is on the page. So you should be using a tag that provides such information. Think of it in terms of a Microsoft Word, Google Doc, or OpenOffice document. When you're typing in a document, you might select different headings in order to tell the user what part of the document they're reading. In HTML, you can do the exact same thing, except we call these tags H1 and H2, H3, etc. Search engines also use headings to index the structure and content of a web page. Therefore, you can change the div tag to the more appropriate H1 tag for our title. Go ahead and do so, and then refresh your browser and tell me what happened. What did happen to the text My App? Did nothing visibly change? Or did the text change in size? Or did the box around the text change? Be sure to select any and all that apply. Earlier in the lesson, we talked extensively about how everything on a web page is a box. Now, before you start positioning boxes, you need a better understanding of the box model, which is what you see on the screen here. There's the concept of margins and borders, padding, and content, all of which makes up the box on the web page. A link to this demo is provided in the instructor notes section, so feel free to follow along. If we explore this box in Developer Tools, you'll find a similar box to what you see on the page in the Computed tab. You see we have a margin, a border, padding, and content. Let's explore each of these items. Starting at the very center, we have our content, and this is the image or text that's appearing on the website. You can think of it as the nucleus. It sits at the very center, and the other layers serve to protect it so that other items on the page either don't overlap or sit too close so that the website isn't very visually appealing. In the next layer, we have the padding, and this is the green color. The padding clears an area around the content, and it's affected by the background color of the box. So you can think of it as the space inside of the box that protects the content directly. Border then goes around the padding and the content, and the border is inherited from the color property of the box. And lastly, our outer layer is the margin, and this clears an area around the border. The margin doesn't have a background color, and it's completely transparent, and you can think of this as the space between boxes. Now you can play along with the widths of each of these and see how it affects the box both here and in the Computed tab. For example, if I change the margin from 20 pixels to 30 pixels, you'll notice that we got a little bit of extra space here at the top. And if you move to the Computed tab, you see that we have 30 pixels here at the top and 30 pixels at the bottom. Moving back to 20, we now go back to 20 pixels. Feel free to stick around here and play a little bit, changing the widths of the margin, border, padding, and content, and see how it affects the box both here and in the Computed tab. Don't worry, I'll still be here when you get back. Now, by default, the size of your actual element is equal to the sum of the border, padding, and content widths. So if we wanted to compute the width of the element shown on the page, we would have a left border of 10, plus a left padding of 30, plus a content width of 200, plus the right padding of 30, and the right border of 10. So our actual element width is actually 280 pixels, not just the 200 pixel width of the content. Now, this makes it kind of hard to know how much space the box will actually take on the screen without recalculating it each and every time you change one of these values. But luckily, an easier to use model has been developed, and we should plan to use that. This is CSS style, box sizing, border box. This makes the calculation of the element size include both the border and padding, so that it's easier to make layouts. You can just set the width of the overall box, and no matter how you tweak the padding and border sizes, the size of the box will always stay the same. Remember though that margin is not included in this size. However, there is one drawback with this model. I mean, isn't there always a catch? It's been developed fairly recently, so if you want to be sure that older browsers are also able to display it, you need to add what's called browser-specific prefixes. Now, these prefixes are WebKit, Moz, and MS. You can just add them in front of the style definition, and they're defined like so. As always, see the instructor notes for more information. Now, you may have noticed that we've been setting the size of a box in pixels, but it's also possible to do it as a percentage. If we go back to the My Favorite App page as an example, we can see how changing the content box from a set pixel to a percentage affects the screen size. You can also set the size of a box as either a pixel or a percentage. If you set it as a percentage, the size will change depending on how big the screen is or how encompassing the box is. If you set the box size in pixels, it will take exactly that size and will not change no matter how big or small the screen is. This can sometimes lead to a bad user experience. For example, if we look back at our My Favorite App, you'll see that this paragraph is defined as a set number of pixels. If I resize the screen, you'll see that it stays the same and disappears as I make it smaller. However, if I instead set this to be a percentage, say we want it to take up 50% of the screen, notice how the size changes as I make the screen smaller. You can also set a max width for the box, and in that case it will resize and become smaller when necessary, but not larger than the set max width. And now it's time for you to put this info into your own style sheet file. Add the border box definition and then add max width attributes to the divs encompassing the image and description of the app. Now, if we look back at our design mock, we got notes from the designer that the image should be 460 pixels wide and the description should be 705 pixels wide. Then, what happens when you add these changes to your CSS file and explore the result in Developer Tools? Did nothing change? Do we have different box sizes? Or do we have a different layout? As you observed in the previous exercise, even when you defined the width of the divs, they still were displayed one under another, as if they were taking the whole width of the page. This isn't what you want, meaning that you need to do some positioning of the boxes. There's a lot of power in CSS to position elements. However, it is probably one of the most complicated concepts about CSS. Now, we'll just cover one powerful technique, and that's how to use the Flexbox layout. Flexbox means flexible box, and it provides an efficient way to lay out, align, and distribute space among items in a container, or div. Now, remember in our mock layout that we have our image next to our description. If you want several elements to be next to each other, you can change the display attribute of the parent container to value flex. Looking here at our app, we have our parent div class app, and here we can add display flex. Wow, that made the child elements try and align next to each other. For it to work, you also have to give the items a size that is smaller than the default 100%, but you already did that in the last exercise. Be sure to check out all of the cool features of Flexbox in the links included in the instructor notes section. Then it's time for you to use this magic and finally make the boxes on your page behave properly. The page is starting to look more like the design, but we're still missing the image. To use the image, you have to store it somewhere where the page can access it. Make a folder called Images inside your project folder and put the image there. Make sure the image name does not contain any spaces or accented characters, or else it will make linking to it more difficult. You can add the image to the page with the tag img and providing the source of the image, like so. You should also always provide this alt attribute, which displays alternate information to the screen in case the browser cannot display the image. Once you have added the image, the page should look a lot more like the actual design mock. But how does our page still differ from the design mock? Is the header background and text color still different? Are the margins and padding for the boxes still different? What about the borders of the boxes? What about the font size and style? Do we still need to update those? If you look back to the very first moment that you wrote code in this lesson, you'll notice that you've been following a very simple pattern of code, test, and refine. You'll write some code, test and see how it looks against the design mockup that you received, and then make any refinements or modifications to the code so that it looks closer to the design. And you'll repeat this process of testing and modifying until it looks like the design you were given. But how do you know where to start testing? And then how do you also know what to refine so that it looks closer to the design? First, you need to get the structure of the page right. You should be able to do that from the design by visually boxifying it. Then move on to work on the tags. If something needs to be a heading, make it so. Then think about the size of the boxes. How big should they be? And then how to position them where you want on the screen. Once the general layout is complete, the time has come for smaller details, and these you can polish until the page looks exactly like the design image you were given. So, to summarize, first, make sure to divide and conquer. Look for places that are distinct. Everything on the web is a box. So, look for the natural boxes. Then, look for repeated styles and semantic elements. H2 should be the second biggest headings on the page, and things like that. Think about how you can relate this to HTML elements. Then, write your HTML. Then, apply your styles. Go from your biggest site-wide elements to your smallest, like widgets. Then, fix the small things. Look at your site in other browsers, resize your window, and just keep repeating steps 3 and 4 until you're happy and your website looks like the design mock. Now, developer tools can also be a really great help to you during the code, test, refine routine. You're able to test things on the fly and see how it affects your page without actually changing the HTML and CSS files. So for example, with the header one here, I can easily change the font size to make it bigger or smaller. I can change the font family, say to Arial. I can also change the background colors of things. So for example, say I might not have the hexadecimal color from the designer, but I just want to use this slider and find something that looks pretty close. You can also click over to the Sources tab and see the code in the same place. And then also remember that you can reset any changes by just clicking the refresh button. So go ahead and play around a bit with DevTools and see what you can change, and then let me know. Just how cool is it to play with DevTools? Let me know on a scale from 1 to 10, with 1 being a total snooze fest, and 10 being totally awesome. Personally, I hope you choose 10. Now look at your page and compare it to the design mock. And make sure that you go deeper than just a simple visual check. See if the defining parts are correct. The layout, margins, fonts, colors, etc. For example, does the image in the mock-up look different than the image on your page? In comparing the two, you can see that there's actually a space here, and we don't have a space here. You can use DevTools to find the proper value of the margin for the image class. Once you've refined it in DevTools, you can then save it to your CSS file. You can look to the design mock to find this information. The background and color for the title is also incorrect. Now, often these colors are provided within the design document, and you can see these small boxes on the left-hand side, and the color in a hex code is defined there. But you can also use different color picker tools to get the same information. As you refine the design, answer the following questions. First, what margin size gets the design closer to the mock? Also, what is the background color for the header? It's important that the HTML and CSS that you write is correct and complies with standards. If it's incorrect, it might display OK in one browser, which correctly guesses your intention, but incorrectly in another, which makes a different assumption. And there are also icons you can show on your web page so that others know that your page complies with the standards. We've provided links where you can verify your HTML and CSS code in the instructor notes section below. Go ahead and do this now for your HTML page and explore the error that it returns. The error is somewhat cryptic, so if you can't figure out what it means, don't worry. Just see the answer video for an explanation. In exploring the error, you'll notice that there's something missing from the page. What element is missing something? Let me know which element is missing something. Now, you just have to enter the tag here, for example, HTML or div. Then let me know, was your CSS correct? Just answer yes or no.
إذا أعجبك الفيديو لا تنسى الاشتراك في القناة وتفعيل الجرس ليصلك كل جديد.